But things were different in the local church. Things were different in the local church. In the local church, customs and societal barriers were being broken down pretty aggressively. So let me paint the picture for you as best I can. Here we are in the first century in the Roman Empire, and there are these little groups of people starting to pop up everywhere called churches or local churches. And in these churches, which are usually meeting in people's homes, there is singing, there's communion, there's corporate prayer, which in some cases is being done by women. So here we have mixed gatherings of men and women meeting in people's private homes. That's a little bit odd in a first century Greco-Roman context. And sometimes there's women who are speaking publicly, even though it's a mixed gathering of men and women. That's strange. That doesn't usually happen. And by the way, it wasn't just that these were mixed gatherings of men and women. There were also Jews and Gentiles together, which could have been very odd and strange and even offensive for Jewish people who lived in Greek and Roman cities. There were also, believe it or not, Roman elites sitting on the same floor with Roman slaves. We have in this situation people who are part of the Roman ruling class sitting down on the floor, talking with, eating with, communing with indentured servants. These people had communal meals together called love feasts. They were constantly commingling. This was beyond strange in the first century. This was borderline scandalous. The neighbors who were walking by, looking into these homes and seeing these mixed groups of people, men and women, slaves and upper class people and Jews and Gentiles all sitting together with women talking publicly while everyone else is listening or praying publicly. Neighbors would have looked into one of these gatherings and said, "What on earth is going on in there? All these people together in one place, sitting, eating, singing, praying. Who can make sense of this? What are these Christian people up to?" This is what you had with the early church in the Roman Empire. Some practices that were astonishing to the wider culture and very, very, very barrier breaking, which is exactly why Paul in 1 Corinthians 11 wanted the church to maintain as much public credibility as possible, and why he wanted to and did in this passage put some very clear boundaries around etiquette. In this case, women keeping their heads covered, so as to ensure that the church would remain as publicly credible as possible, despite the fact that they're already breaking all sorts of cultural norms. Does that paint a pretty good picture of what I think is going on in the passage? I hope it does. Now let's actually read it, and you can see if the picture I've just painted for you actually fits with what Paul writes to the Corinthians in chapter 11. Starting in verse 2, Paul says this: "Now I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions, even as I delivered them to you. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God." So right off the bat, he starts with what is, in my opinion, a very simple restatement of the familial order. It's not an accident that he is using the familial order as an example or as sort of a launching pad into the conversation he's about to have. I think the reason that this was happening in Corinth, women who were already being given this sort of brand new opportunity that many of them probably had never had before, which was to speak in a public setting with men, to lift their voice and to be heard, whether it's through prayer or through something they wanted to share publicly in a setting outside of their own private home with their own family where other men and women were present. And so this felt like a family. So you could see why they got to the point where they were so comfortable, where they were like, "Hey, This is just like being with my family. I'm going to take my head covering off because this is a safe place. This is family. So Paul starts with a very simple restatement of the familial order that exists, not just in the church, but that has existed in human civilization for all of time. But he makes sure we understand that Christ is the head of every man. This is what he says, that I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Husband, if he's going to be a godly husband, must submit himself to Christ, who is the head of the church and every individual family. At least he should be. By the way, he's also ruler of heaven and earth, according to the New Testament. So he's covering all levels here. But likewise, a godly wife must submit to her husband. This is a very simple, specific, standard bit of Christian doctrine that has always been and will always be until the Lord returns. He's reminding them of this up front. And now he's going to get into more specifics. So verses 4 and 5 say this: every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. Let me read that again and emphasize a few different things. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. What do you think Paul's saying at this point? So he just went from talking about familial order, right? Christ is the head of the family, the head of the man's the head of the wife, right? Christ submits to God the Father. Now he goes into this thing about men praying or prophesying with their heads covered is dishonorable. For women to do it, it's to pray or prophesy with their head uncovered is dishonorable. I think what he's saying is this: that when a man prays in church, when a man speaks in church, he ought to look like, and he ought to demonstrate, showcase obvious maleness. Obvious maleness. If a man stands up in church and begins to speak, he should not leave any question in anyone's mind as to whether or not he is a man or a woman. If a man speaks in church, it needs to be clear that he is a male. Put it to you this way: if a family came to your local church, and that day dad decided that he wasn't going to put on his slacks and his button-up shirt, he was going to put on a dress and a blouse and some lipstick and some mascara and some eyeshadow, and put, we'll leave his hair out of it for now. He was going to appear as a woman and come to church. And then he came to church and he sat down with his family. And then at a moment where there was corporate prayer being offered or made available, he stands up and begins to pray publicly. Would that be normal? Would that be normal in your local church? Would that be a good thing? It shouldn't be normal in your local church, and it would not be a good thing. In Paul's mind, this would be disgraceful for a man to be in church appearing like a woman, and even more so for a man to be in church appearing like a woman and then standing up to speak or to lead some sort of aspect of the worship service. Why would it be wrong? Why would it be disgraceful for a man in church to appear as a woman? Because he is at odds with nature. That's why. Because he is at odds with nature, with creation, and thus he is at odds with God himself. When men try to dress like women and women try to dress like men, and they do so under the assumption that they can be whatever they want to be, despite the fact that God made every single person, male or female, you're at odds with God. And for Paul, this is not okay in the local church. The same goes for women. And in this time and place and culture, for a woman to pray with her head uncovered would mean, at least publicly, according to Paul, that she is appearing as a man, which is not right. Now, it could also mean that she's dressing like a floozy, that she's trying to appear like a prostitute. But Paul really hones in this part of the passage on the cross-dressing aspect. That's why he says in verse 5, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. This is what it says in verse 5. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. What's he doing when he says that? What's he doing when he says that right there? He's basically saying, okay, you want to appear like a man? You want to have your head uncovered? You're being allowed to stand up and pray publicly, corporately, in a mixed gathering of people. You want to have your head uncovered? Just go all the way. Just go all the way and just shave your head. Just look all the way like a man does. But is he really saying that? No, he's not really saying that. Paul is throwing out that hypothetical because he knows that not a single woman in the Corinthian church would ever consider shaving her head. And he knows that. That's why he's saying, hey, let's not leave anybody confused. There are no floozies in this congregation, and no woman, even though women are being invited to speak and pray publicly in these gatherings, should give anybody the impression that she is trying to appear like a man. If you want to do that, just go ahead and shave your head. But no one's actually going to do that, right? No one's actually going to do that. So the church has liberty that is breaking down societal norms and barriers in the first century. I believe that is absolutely going on, not only in the Corinthian church, but everywhere. And some of the women, like I mentioned, might have been saying to themselves with this newfound liberty, this is awesome. This is awesome. When I'm here with all the believers, I feel just like when I'm at home. It's like family to me. I can just take my head covering off because it's no different. And it shouldn't be different. Church is like family. But remember what Paul is talking about. Remember what the greater context of the passage is. We don't want to give anybody inside the church or outside the church any reason to be critical of us. We don't want to give anybody a reason for there to be misunderstanding. This is why Paul recognizes a need to draw a line. No, he says, let women pray in church, out loud, publicly, in front of everyone, but uphold this custom for the sake of those who might see and get confused. We do not want outsiders looking in, getting confused, and having a reason to start rumors about us, like that our women are dominating our men, that they're cross-dressing, or that they're loose. We don't want any of that to even be a possibility. We don't want to leave that door open for the adversary to creep in and have a reason to hurl accusations against us. Thanks for watching. My name's Blake, and over the past 20 years, I've been a missionary, a pastor, and a Bible college and seminary professor. During that entire time, I've been teaching the Bible. And if you want more Bible content to come your way, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video. And also, check out this video right here.